let's finish up by talking about using dynamic topology in our sculpting. So we're just going to use a basic cube here just to illustrate how low res this is. It's just a default cube, but let's go to edit mode so we can see that we basically got one face, on each side. There's no subdivisions or anything like that. So normally, if we were going to be sculpting, we would want to have plenty of resolution to be able to sculpt, because right now we only have a few points that we're able to use to change the shape of this. Even if we are using the sculpting tools, we'd want to subdivide this or add divisions somehow. But in some cases, you may not know exactly what shapes you're trying to create. You may want to have just a little bit more of a free-form way of creating things. And so you do have the ability inside of Blender to have the subdivision or the resolution of the mesh driven by the sculpting that you're doing. So it's automatically adding detail or resolution in those areas where you are sculpting. So you can shape it, do whatever you want to it, and it's going to automatically give you enough resolution in those areas. So to do that, let's go over into sculpt mode and see how this works. So we'll use just the sculpt draw, and we want to come down to dynamic topology, and we want to enable this. Now there's a few things in here. We're not going to worry too much about these settings down at the bottom, but this detail slider, this is what's going to determine sort of the size of the detail. So a smaller number in pixels is going to give you kind of finer levels of detail in general. And so let's come in here. Remember, there's only a couple of points here, but if we start to just sculpt on these corners, maybe come across this corner, you can see, wow, we're actually getting more detail in there than we would expect, right? It was just one face here, but now it's automatically adding the detail in here. We can come in and smooth it if we want to. We can turn on smooth shading if we want to kind of smooth the normals there. Okay, we can also symmetrize the detail from one side to the other by using this little selection here from one axis to another. So we could select the Y. So let's go negative Y to Y. And it's going to add that same detail on the other side. So it's kind of a cool feature. So if we want to get sort of finer detail, for instance, if we come up here, we can do kind of this level of detail to begin with. Let's take this detail slider down to maybe half. So take it down to 6 and then come down on this side. And you can see that we're now able to get a much finer level of detail here by taking that slider down. All right, so let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So we'll go to edit mode, and here you can see that it is actually adding polygons in the places where we are sculpting. So in the areas where we don't have the sculpt, you can see that we have bigger polygons, and then it has finer level of resolution in the areas where we need that extra detail. So coming back to sculpt, we want to make sure to re-enable dynamic topology here. And I want to show you another brush that we haven't really used to this point. You can use it with a regular sculpting process, but it's not as useful, I don't think. And that's the snake hook. Now, a snake hook will do is kind of like move, but it'll kind of pull out a long, thin area. And this becomes really useful when you can dynamically recreate the topology. So let me get kind of a larger brush stroke. And if I select this and start to pull this out, you can see it's actually creating new topology as it comes out. We can then kind of smooth things out if we want to, but you can see how it's created that new topology. If we turn off dynamic topology and try to do that, it's just going to stretch them out. So it's going to start to do it, but the polygons can only stretch so far. With dynamic topology turned on, those polygons don't stretch. It automatically recreates and recalculates and adds new topology there. We can come in from the center of this and grow things out. Okay, so you can create some really neat effects using the snake hook brush, and it works well with something like the dynamic topology because it'll actually recreate that. And at some point, even with a high resolution mesh, you're going to get stretched polygons if you try to do this with a regular sculpt. So that's kind of a fun thing to play around with, and it'll dynamically, again, create the topology that you need in order to get the shape that you want there. Okay, so check that out. That's the dynamic topology. You can always go in and disable it if you want to. Keep in mind that you want to do, if you're going to do this, you don't want to use a nice mesh that you're going to be needing later for production, or something with UVs or vertex paint, things like that. You want to be careful of that. All right, so hope you've enjoyed the last hour or so going through sculpting in Blender. It really is a pretty full-featured area of Blender, and it'll enable you to get, you know, a lot of the same kind of tools that you're able to use in something like ZBrush or in Mudbox or in some other applications that obviously cost a bit more. You're able to get a lot of that functionality here in Blender with the sculpting tools. So definitely check those out, especially if you're working with something that's going to be a little bit more high res, that can take that will need to take some of that detail that the sculpting tools will give you. So make sure to check that out. So hope you've enjoyed the last little bit going through sculpting in Blender. I know I've enjoyed it. So we'll see you next time.